The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everybody, welcome. This is Sandy. We're just a minute or two away from getting started. Hope everybody's having a good day. We are going to be talking about how to pitch your story to the news here in just a few minutes. Hopefully you got the handouts and are ready to go. I'm going to pull those up myself so I have them available and ready. Susan, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. Perfecto.
Oh, great.
Yay.
Okay.
All right, let me get just a couple of things going. We'll do a quick tech check and then it's going to be time to go. All right, let me see who else is here. Looks like Sharon is here. Kristen's tuned in. A couple more people popping in real soon. Okay, so you guys, do a quick tech check for me. If you can hear me okay and you can see the slides, you'll see a picture of me and Susan. It says get your story in the news. Let me know if you can see that. You can just type that in the Q&A box. All right, perfecto. Thank you guys so much for letting me know all is well. All right, well, I've got 3 o'clock straight up, so we're going to go ahead and kick this off. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad you're here, whether you're here with us live or you are listening to the recording. I'm super excited you're here. This is a fun topic. I know that a lot of organizations want to get their story in the news, but maybe they don't know exactly how to do it. So here's what you're going to get today. I have done it for multiple nonprofits, and Susan has probably done it, but Susan has a background as a journalist. You want to tell us real quick about your experience as a reporter? Susan, are you there?
You went out just a second there.
Oh,
Can you hear
dear.
me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Did you ask about my experience?
Yes, tell us about being a reporter.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I started as a reporter when I was right out of college and worked for a newspaper that came out twice a week, and eventually worked my way up to one that was a daily newspaper, covered Virginia and Tennessee. Anyway, I did that newspaper for about 8 years. So I had a bureau of my own, office of my own, and covered every imaginable beat there was.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Very cool. So you guys, you're in really good hands. Between us, we have probably seen or done it all. We're going to share with you some of our secrets for getting things in the news. Because really, it's about this. It's about reaching your audience, whoever your audience is. The local news is still a good way to do that. And when you can get a story in the news, you don't have to pay for that. I saw somebody asking on some online forum the other day, like how do I pick the best advertising to purchase in local newspapers? And somebody said, why would you do that when you can pitch a story and get it in for free? And that is the truth. We want to make sure you take advantage of all those free opportunities first before you try to spend any money. Spending money on advertising can be really tricky business, and we won't even go there today because it's pretty easy to get your story in the news. Now, here's something you have to understand when you're wanting to use the local media to get your story out there. You may have somebody that says, oh, nobody reads the newspaper anymore. Well, yeah, they do. They may be reading it online. That's what my husband does. We used to get the newspaper all the time, and we stopped a couple of years ago, and we read it online now. So a lot of people are still reading. And what has happened in the local news media, especially at newspapers, as they've shrunk and they've been bought out and some have closed, they're still hungry for really good stories. And the easier you can make it for them to cover, the more likely they're going to be to say yes and to run something that you give them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But don't think for a minute that any of your local news, like nobody's listening, nobody's watching, nobody's paying attention. Not true. There's still lots of people who are. And again, it's free. So if you get good at it and you build a relationship, you can get a story placed pretty regularly. When I worked at the food bank, we had a great relationship with our local ABC affiliate. And I had built it up to the point that the news editor, the assignment editor, his name was Joey, when I sent over something to Joey, he would cover it because he knew that I was going to send him a good story. He knew that it wasn't going to be fluff. It wasn't going to be, a dead end. He knew that I was going to have a good story because I just proved that to him over time. So that's part of what we want to show you today is how do you do that? How do you send them something really good consistently so that they start to look to you as the expert in that field? And that's when it's really cool. If there's something that breaks nationally and then they call you to say, what's your take on this situation locally? That's what you're looking for. So here's kind of where we're going today. We're going to talk about a good story and how to identify a good story. We're going to walk you through how to write a great press release. There are definitely some tricks to that. How to send it to your media contacts, and maybe we even back up there and talk about how to build a list of media contacts, how to follow up with them about your press release, and then this last step gets dropped out a lot, but you definitely want to thank them if they run the story. So that is where we are going today. So we want to start with a good story. It doesn't do any good to reach out to the local media contacts if your story is very thin or very weak, or it's all about you. If you're like, well, we need to raise $10,000 to meet our budget, that's not a story. They're looking for something interesting. They're looking for something that their readers or viewers are interested in. So here are some things you need to know about good stories. The best thing that you can do is to learn to think like a reporter. You want to start studying reporters, study the stories, and want to start thinking like a reporter. They're always looking for stories that feature an underdog or a hero. They love that. They love those kind of local person does good stories. Like if you've got a child in your program who's doing a lemonade stand to raise money for something else that's going on in your organization, they're going to love that. So it's got to be interesting to readers or viewers. There's got to be a point to your story, and you want to start with the point. You can't just ramble, and you can't throw everything in. And that's your tendency a lot of times, because if you live and breathe your organization, you know it inside out, upside down, 6 ways to Sunday, your tendency is to share everything you know, and you can't do that. You got to keep it really relevant and only the points that a reader, a listener, a watcher would be interested in. Susan, what would you add to that about looking for and identifying good stories? Uh-oh, did I lose Susan? I may have lost her temporarily. I know she was having trouble yesterday with her connection. Okay, I'm going to go on. We'll see if she'll drop back in. Hopefully she'll be able to get back here with us. All right, so in a good story, you can definitely feature a twist. Something that makes it really interesting, something that's like, oh, that was unexpected. Weren't quite expecting that. So when I worked at the food bank, we got food in every day, right? It came in, it went out. And if I wanted to do a story about that, that's the usual stuff. And I might be able to get somebody to do a story about that one time. But when you get the really bizarre donations of things, then you can get a story in. So this happened right about the time that I hired in. They got a donation of peanut butter in 55-gallon drums. Isn't that crazy? Like, what were they going to do with peanut butter in 55-gallon drums? And so they pitched it to the local news. They came out and did a story. It was pretty cool. And everybody was talking about that, like, oh my gosh, all that peanut butter. What are you going to do with all that peanut butter? It was a cool story. We had another one time. This was a summer. It was right around the July the 4th weekend. It was a Friday afternoon. We got a guy that called. He had a tractor trailer load of loose watermelon. So they were not in, normally they come in those big boxes. It's kind of a box that sits on a pallet. You see those in the grocery store. Normally they come like that. So it's easy to move. You can move them with a forklift. These were loose, and about half of them were broken. You should have seen us out there. We formed one of those bucket brigades, where somebody would grab one and turn to the person next to them, and they were like passing them down the line and then loading them into those boxes right off that truck. And it was a fantastic photo opportunity. That was the kind of thing where we knew that the local news would want to come out and see that and get that photo up of us unloading all those crazy watermelons. Susan, are you back?
Hi, Sandy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I had to switch to the phone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there must be something weird going on with your laptop.
Yeah, must be.
Well, what crazy stories
Yeah,
have you seen or covered over the years? Maybe stories with a twist or stories that are featuring an underdog or a hero?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one to think back that far. Well, when people would call me up with something they wanted a story about, the first thing I thought about was what are my editors going to say? Are they going to be interested in? Do they feel like that it's going to be something that readers will pick up the newspaper for? And sometimes, it has to be a little on the edge, like, sometimes some controversial, but maybe not. Getting something positive in. I mean, they love human interest stuff, but it'll always make the front page. So, having an angle, if I think about animal welfare, for instance, if I had an overload of animals that were about to be, I was going to have to euthanize, and I needed to get some press to get people in to adopt them. I mean, a reporter would jump on that because it's hardcore. It's, it's going to be interesting. It's going to catch people. It's got a little bit of a negative edge to it. Unfortunately, a lot of times editors like that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's kind of where I think about when I think about when people called me. I always went back to whether, what kind of response I was going to get from my editor about how they felt about it.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, that sometimes what's important to us when we're right in the middle of our nonprofit, it's important to us. It may or may not be interesting, relevant, important to the news media. So again, the best thing you can do is learn to think like a journalist, learn to spot the story, and the more you send them good stories, the more they will trust you. I remember another time I was working at an after-school program that provided music lessons to kids who couldn't afford them. And it was about this time of year. It was late July, early August, and it was time to do inventory. So we had this massive closet of musical instruments, and you name it. We had, of course, the clarinets, trumpets, saxophones, that kind of stuff. And we also had violins and cellos and guitars. We had a harp. We had all this crazy stuff, and no matter what somebody wanted to learn to play, we probably had it. And I remember we took 3 or 4 of us, and we pulled all that stuff out and laid it all in. It was all in chairs and in the floor around the conference room. And all of a sudden I looked at that and went, OMG, there is a photo op and a half here. So I just ran back and called called the ABC affiliate. I'm like, Joey, you need to send somebody over here right now because I've got a photo op for you. And they were all over it. It hit the news that night. It was very cool. But it's just about training yourself to always be looking around for the interesting part, the interesting piece. And I think the problem with that is there's a lot about your organization that you're used to seeing every day that other people are not used to seeing every day that might be really fascinating. So again, you gotta really put your journalist hat on and start thinking about what those interesting things. So here's some tips on learning to spot that story. Study the stories that are currently covered. So if you have a local newspaper that you would really like to get a story in, watch what kind of stories they're covering, especially on the local level. So I was just looking at the Knoxville News Sentinel website last night, and they have a lot of stuff that I would say is national news or regional. They definitely have a lot of sports. This is definitely a college sport town. So there's a lot of sports stories, but then they have a whole section of like local stories, and that's more of your human interest, feel good, local person does good, local business, that kind of thing. But you know what? The newspaper in your area may be different. They may have different kinds of things that they prefer to cover. So the best thing you can do is study the stories of the media outlet that you're wanting to get in and see what they're covering. You can also just flat out ask. You can find out who is the reporter or maybe a news director that covers that particular beat or that particular area, and ask them what they're looking for. I remember this one time I was working with an organization. They employed blind people in a manufacturing facility. It was the darndest thing I'd ever seen. And we were trying to get some stories in the news. And my client knew a reporter well enough that he arranged for us to go have lunch with this lady, which was awesome. And I'll never forget that she said, listen, we are understaffed and overworked, and I would love to cover that stuff, but I don't have time. If you can just write something up and send it to me, if it's written halfway decently at all, I'll run it. And I'm like, done. That's done. Like, we'll do it. Totally on it. And I think that there's a lot of media outlets that are like that. They're very hungry for good stories, but they don't have time necessarily to write it. So we just wrote a little bit longer press release and put everything in there that she needed, and she copied and pasted it. And I've actually had that happen a lot. So you can just ask the reporter or news director what they're looking for, what they need, how you can make life easy for them. And as you start to develop that relationship, they'll tell you, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. You can look for the interesting angle or twist, because there always is one. There's always a twist or an angle to every story. You just got to teach yourself to look for it. Offer yourself or your organization as a resource. Again, like when I was at the food bank, and there was, I don't know, some study that came out that talked about the number of children in the state of Tennessee that were going hungry. Guess who they called? They called us and said, you know, what's your take on that? Thank goodness I had some stats at my fingertips. So when they called, I was able to say, hang on, I've got that right here. And I was able to give them some information that was relevant and local, and they loved that. They ate it right up. Jackie has a question. She's saying, with asks, you say every 3 news stories about our rescues, but with news media, you have not been covered with your. Okay. All right. So, Jackie, when you're talking about news media, let's say it doesn't matter if it's TV stations, newspapers, or whatever, it's a little bit different. And you do want to think about the relationship with them and what they're getting out of it. When you provide them a good story, or you provide yourself as a resource, you're making their life easier. And we'll want to hear what Susan has to say about this in a minute. You're saving them time. They don't have to go research to see who the expert is locally about senior animals or animal abuse, or whatever the topic is. And so what I found was I could send a press release whenever I had a good story. I could plan that, like if my intention was, well, I want to pitch a story once a quarter, and then I'm going to be looking for good stories. Honestly, at the food bank, I could find a good story a week. It just wasn't a problem. And I got to the point where I knew which ones they were really going to jump on and be very interested in. And I might have 2 in the same week. I might have 3 in a month, and then I might go 6 weeks and have nothing. And honestly, I think as long as you've got a good story that they're going to be interested in, you can pitch it as often as you want. And the trick with the news media then is, if you pitch a story and they run it, you've got to thank them. You've got to follow up and thank them. I'm going to get ahead of myself here a little bit, because we're going to talk about thanking them a little bit later. But I can't tell you how many reporters that have covered a story for me, and I have sent them a simple handwritten note card. Simple little thing just to say, thank you for covering this story. And the next time I see them, they say, that was awesome. Do you know that nobody else sends me a thank you? And I've had that happen so many times, where they'll say, I cover a lot of stories for a lot of nonprofits, and nobody else thanks me. You're the only one. That stuns me, frankly, that other organizations are not doing that. And that was another one of those relationship builders, and it really set us apart. And I showed them that they mattered to me, and that I appreciated what they did, that it wasn't just all about us and our organization. So that's another piece of it. Always have a good story, build that relationship, and you can pitch as often as you want. Susan, what would you add to this?
I was just, thinking about when the news release came in to me or the editor. You looked at it to decide if it was something. The first thing you did was look at it to decide if it was something you could develop into a story, or if it was going to be something that goes in the basket to be typed up and put in the community section or something. And it was always because of that angle or that twist, or lots of times it's just like kind of with donors in a way. If it was about a problem and it was being solved, or someone who had overcome something, and you were showing how they managed to do that with your services, and that can go for a lot of different areas, is that twist of the human element. They love to quote people. The reporters don't like to write stories that they can't quote people. They want to, refer to the experts and use quotes. So putting quotes in your news release is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Having people in your news release.
I have made up so many of those over the years, it's not even funny. Mostly where I'm putting,
Yeah.
creating a quote for an executive director, and yeah.
Oh yeah, me too.
It's funny. So really, the bottom line, as with anything, is practice. Just train yourself always, always, always. Like every day, look around at a situation and say, if I were going to pitch this as a story, what would be the angle? What would be the twist? What would be the story that I would pitch out of that? And it can be all kinds of different things. And again, when you start teaching yourself to pay attention in that way, you'll start to find some different things. It is a muscle that you have to develop. I do want to put some other pieces out here that I want to just be real careful about. And then looks like Sharon has a question. Number one, it cannot be just all about your organization. It can't be, we're a nonprofit and we need money, so people need to give. That's not going to fly at all. Now, it can be, like to Susan's point, we're the animal shelter and we are overloaded right now, and we're going to have to start putting animals down if we can't get some more adoptions. You might get a story out of that. The animal shelter in Cape Girardeau that Susan and I work with, they have a brand new program that they're rolling out that they're going to put a press release out about. Now, can you do that? Yes, but it can't just be, we're starting this new program, we're excited, run a story about it. The program is basically, it's called Adventure Tales, and it's meant for people to come and borrow a dog to take out, to take for a hike, to take to the park, to go play with, to go on an adventure with. And if they're going to go ahead and get a couple of students from the local university to do that and kind of pilot that program. So by the time they pitch the story to the news, they're going to be able to they'll have photos, they'll have a quote from one of those students, and they'll be able to talk about the program and how it benefits the community. And that's when that local newspaper will pick it up, no question. You want to be real careful about emergency pleas. You can go out with like oh my gosh, if we don't hurry up and get this resource, we're going to have to close our doors. I'd be real careful about that. Personally, I would not do that. I'd find a different way to spin it. And the other piece is, if you start putting emergency pleas out into the community, you're destroying trust. People start to think like, well, what's going on over at that organization that they're in such bad shape? Do they not know how to manage their money? Do they not know how to do whatever? So you got to be really careful about that. I love this last one from Susan. Only tell a reporter what you want them to know. There is no such thing as off the record. Susan, tell us more about that.
Well, a lot of people think that they can tell a reporter certain things and they won't repeat it, or they won't use it in a story. But when you tell, I can remember one time playing cards with somebody, and they worked for the Department of Health and Human Services, and they said something about, we were talking about nursing homes, just a topic in conversation, and she said, yeah, I don't know what they're going to do about such and such. They've lost their license. And I never said a word about that. But I went back to work and called the licensure place and found out they had lost their license and did a story on it. So you always risk, when you're around a reporter, dropping something that they're going to pick up on, because that's what they're trained to do, is have that ear. Mm-hmm. So, nothing, I mean, when never, complain about another organization to a reporter.
Oh, yeah.
You know, yeah. You know, just be careful that whatever you say to them, you're okay with them putting that in print or on TV or whatever.
Oh, that's a great point. Great point. Sharon's asking, when I was at the food bank, how many publications or outlets did I pursue? So we were based in Knoxville, Tennessee, and we served Greater East Tennessee. I had the 3 major television stations, and there was one big newspaper in town. There were lots of little newspapers, especially in the outlying communities. And then I had probably 3 or 4 good-sized radio stations in town, but they weren't necessarily going to do a story. I did have a news talk station that I could pitch a story to, but the other radio stations, it usually was more of a feel good kind of thing that I could get them to do something with. And see, that was a whole other thing I had to know, and also know what their demographic and their audience was, so that I wasn't trying to pitch something that would totally not work for them. And it was almost like, you ever seen those guys at the circus that spin the plates on the sticks? You know, you have a stick and they put a plate on the top and you get it spinning. They get the one going and then they go on to the next one. And before long, they've got like 8 or 10 plates on sticks and they're all spinning. For me, it was kind of like that. It was like building a relationship with the one and getting that working real well and then going on to the next one. And before I knew it, I had the three TV stations, 1 newspaper, probably 3 or 4 radio stations, and then so many others that I knew how to send them information. I didn't have as good a relationship, but I knew how to send them. So my media list was probably 30 or 40 outlets that were on there, but I really only had relationships with probably about 5 or 6. And they were the big 5 or 6. That's what I needed. All right, let's go on, because there's a whole lot more. And now, as we talk about the media list and building that contact list, how do you do that, and who are you looking for? You want to start with, I think, I'm going to be really curious to hear what Susan has to say about this. I prefer to work with a news director or an assignment editor personally. You might think about going straight to the reporter, but here's what I found out about reporters, and I'm sure it's still the case. They turn over pretty fast. Reporters, TV reporters, newspapers are better. TV reporters will turn over fairly fast because they're always looking for a bigger market, a bigger opportunity to get into. So, that happened to me one time. I built a relationship with a reporter at the local NBC affiliate, and then the next month I went to reach out to her and she was gone. And I went, well, crap. Now I spent all this time trying to build a relationship and she's moved to Minnesota. Like, this is not working. The news directors and assignment editors tend to not change. So my buddy Joey, and I think Joey just retired from the ABC affiliate like a year or 2 ago. He was the assignment editor there. And so he was the one that knew if I sent him a story that there was a good story there. So that's my thought on that. And I think having more than one contact is a good idea, so that you're not like I had a minute ago where I lost my reporter and then I'm starting all over. I'm back at scratch. The other person that you could build a relationship with, and it's a little different because we're talking about news here, but most TV stations have either a marketing person or a community relations person. And you want to develop a relationship with that person too. That is usually the person who can do a media sponsorship or help you with the TV station supporting an event you have or an activity that you have going on. But you have to understand that marketing and news are 2 completely different things. And just because one of them likes you doesn't mean you're automatically going to get in with the other one. So just keep that in mind. You can start by simply looking at the TV station websites in your area and just look at their contact list and figure out who the right person is to contact. Reach out to them before you need them to say, hey, my name is Sandy. I'm with the fill in the blank organization. I would love to be able to send you some stories, and I'm just curious what kinds of things you're looking for so that I can keep my eyes open to be able to send you those kind of stories. That's a good way to go. Just start before you need them. And it is all about building the relationship. Again, the thank you letter goes a really long way. And there's so many little things you can do too. I'll tell you a couple of things that I've done in the past. I knew that I don't know. I think I just always intuitively knew that little things mean a lot. That it doesn't have to be fancy. And I remember this one holiday season at a staff meeting at the food bank. I said, okay, I want to give homemade treat baskets to all the local news outlets. So I wanted to do the 3 TV stations and the newspaper and like 2 of the radio stations. And I said, all right, so I need everybody, if you guys would agree, who would be willing to make brownies, cookies, Rice Krispie treats, whatever? And everybody jumped on board because they all got it, that was really important. So they brought them in that day, and I made the baskets up and put a really nice handwritten card, and I took them over, and I'll never forget this. And they were very well received, by the way, very well received. Nobody else was bringing in big baskets of homemade treats at that time in the newsroom, and they loved it. So that's what I did. I remember going to the ABC affiliate, and I took it in. Everybody's excited. Oh, it's Sandy from Second Harvest. We're so excited to see you. Thank you so much. I love you. A week or 2 later, I was back over at the TV station for something, and the weatherman, the meteorologist, his name is Matt Hinken. He's actually still there. Matt Hinken stops me in the hall and he goes, I have a bone to pick with you. I'm like, what? What have I done, Matt? What's going on? He said, I just want you to know that by the time I got to work that day, all those goodies in that basket were gone and I didn't get anything. I'm like, all right. So I went home and I made a whole nother basket of cookies and stuff and brought back just for Matt. And part of it was a joke. He wasn't really mad. We had a great relationship and all that. It was just kind of a joke. But you know, that was the thing. They all really liked the cookies and the homemade goodies, and it went really far. So, you know, if that's appropriate for you to do something like that, do that. Some of you have kids in your programs, and you can do really fun little crayon drawings that you can send them as gifts. Get creative with it. You don't want to spend a ton of money on it, but just a little something can go a long way. All right, let's shift gears and talk about press release. When you're writing a press release, there are definitely some things about it. You want to write like a journalist. They tend to write very factually. It's not real fluffy writing. They go right to the 5 W's. They cover the who, what, when, where, and why. And the first paragraph in your press release needs to lay out all the important details so that if the reporter or the news director, whoever, doesn't read the whole thing, they can get the gist of it in the first paragraph. So you want to hit those highlights, hit them fast, and move on. A catchy headline can grab their attention. Susan would probably nod about this. Back in the day, when we used to fax press releases over, I'm really sure that there was probably a 1-inch stack of paper on somebody's desk of all the press releases that had come in that day. And as they're going through trying to figure out, like Susan was saying earlier, trying to figure out what her editor is going to be interested in, the headline is going to help catch their attention. So if there's a really catchy headline, it's going to grab their attention. They're going to be more likely to read. If the headline is boring, they're not going to pay much attention to you. So a catchy headline can be, oh man, I wish I had some of the ones that I used over the years. It can be something either celebrating a really awesome milestone. It can be something with a really horrible piece of news, a danger of a horrible action, just something that, and especially if it's written with alliteration or something that's just got some really juicy words in it and yet still has to be maybe just 5 or 6 words long, maybe 7 or 8 at the most. It's difficult. That is one of the hardest things to do, is to write a good, catchy headline, just so you know. I would still struggle with that today, to come up with the right words that are going to grab somebody's attention. But practice it, and the better you get at that, the more likely you'll be to catch somebody's attention. I mean, nowadays you probably email a press release and you're going to put that headline in the subject line, and it's going to help stand out and get read. You want to make sure your press release is easy to read, well written, no typos, no obviously missing information. You want to make sure you include your contact information, so if they've got a question, they know who to call or email. And a photo op is always a good thing. If there's an opportunity for them to come and snap a picture or shoot a short video or get, what do they call that, a sound bite. If they can get a short sound bite that they can use, that's always a good thing as well. Now, Susan, I'm sure you've probably read way more press releases than I have written. What would you add to that?
You know, one of the things that that I remember the most about being a reporter was I had to come up with a lead. And I sometimes I would have literally 30 minutes to write a story. And I knew if I got back to the office and had that lead, that I would be able, the rest of the story would just flow. And if I got stuck on a lead, then I was in trouble. And so, you know, a lead is what Sandy was talking about, that first paragraph. If the paragraph says so-and-so is announcing something, so-and-so welcomes something, you know, it's just going to be probably not even read the rest of the way. That first paragraph's got to be the thing that you're trying to tell them that is catchy, that is the meat of the story. And that's what reporters do. They want their story read, so that very first paragraph has got to be something that keeps the reader reading. And same thing with the news release. So pay a lot of attention to that and not do first paragraphs that are, you know, the standard announce, welcome, that kind of stuff. Really get to what you're trying to get across.
Yeah, you got to get to the nut of the story really fast. If you have a whole lot of like background information in that first paragraph, that's no bueno. You want to get right to the nut of it, and then you can go on to flesh out in the second paragraph. You can start talking about the background or the why or anything else, but you got to get to the nut of the story really fast. Okay, let's now here's what I do want to do. I want to show you in the handouts. We've got several things for you. And I think you're going to be excited about if you haven't already seen these. So there's a worksheet on page 5. It's actually a bit of a template to help you as you're looking at the different pieces and parts of what you want to include in your press release. And it starts with the heading, and then you can use a subheading, your contact information, pitching your story with the most important details, a quote maybe from your executive director or another person of interest, more details about it, details about a photo opportunity, information about your nonprofit. And by the way, that little paragraph, for me, when I was doing these for the food bank, I developed a really good little paragraph there, and then I've just copy and pasted every time. And then the traditional pound, 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 so they know that that's the end of the press release. And then you'll see here's the sample on page 6. Now that's probably a pretty mediocre headline there. Local food pantry still setting records. That might be more interesting if it's like local food pantry fills 30,000 empty bellies of our neighbors or something like that. There's probably a different way to do that. By the way, so writing these headlines is very similar to writing a subject line. You may have to write 10 or 20 versions of it before you finally go, oh, here it is. Here's what this needs to be. So don't put the pressure on yourself that you got to get it right the first time out, because you probably won't. Just write, edit until you get to a good one. But this at least will show you what a sample press release can look like with a headline, a subhead. Here's your contact information, and the for immediate release is that's just common practice, and the date that it's released from. Then you go right into the main nut of the story. Then the second paragraph is the quote from the executive director. Then you've got about 3 more paragraphs of background information, which is fine. And this is the kind of stuff that when this is well written, they can literally copy and paste that, and they're on their way. I remember the city editor at the Knoxville News Sentinel, we were at, what event was it? It was some event where we were outside having a beer. It was very casual. And I just happened to mention to him, like, Eric, thank you so much for all your support. We really appreciate it. And he said to me, you know what? One of the reasons we like working with you is you write this stuff really well and you email it to me. He said, then all I have to do is copy and paste it and I can tweak it a little. He said, you have no idea how many people try to scribble down 3 or 4 words on a napkin and want me to try to develop something from that. He said, we can't work that hard. So that was a really nice piece of learning that, make it easy for them and you're good to go. I did include for you some online news media resources. So if you're not really sure what newspapers or what other media are in your area, you can use some of these links. and find out. And then I stumbled across these ones for college and university papers and radio. And I thought for some of you, that might be really, really interesting as well. So I thought just give you those resources, those links, and you can go have a look at those. Okay, so Sharon has a very Sharon's asking, what was our background? Um, y'all get a kick out of this. I went to college on a scholarship to study engineering. How crazy is that? Wound up getting a degree in business, and I had a class that I think we did talk about this, but I learned on the job of just doing. That's where I learned how to do working with the media and doing stuff. Susan, what's your degree in? I can't remember.
It's in English.
And thus
Yeah.
you're a writer. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was on the newspaper in college and came out of college doing newspaper stuff and radio. Did radio too, and that was a completely different thing. You had to figure out how to say a lot in 60 seconds.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think for me, I catch on really fast. I can watch what somebody's doing and figure it out pretty fast. And I think that has served me very well in fundraising and in things like this, and figuring out what is a reporter looking for. I'll tell you all another really funny one that I did one time, and it worked. So also at the food bank, we needed to build a larger freezer cooler. So we had this little tiny cooler freezer that it was about the size of something a restaurant might have, and it just wasn't big enough for what we needed. It would hold, like maybe 10 or 12 boxes of turkeys or frozen chicken or whatever. We needed to be able to hold a tractor trailer load or two of frozen, meat or vegetables or whatever. So we decided we were going to build it. It was I don't know, about like $120,000 project. It was pretty cool. When we were done, you could drive up. It had a door on it. You could drive up with the forklift and push a button, and the door would slide open. Like you had this almost like a garage door opener. It was so cool. So you could drive into the cooler and then turn, and there was another one. Push the button, and the freezer door would slide open, and you could drive the forklift in. So it was that big. It was really cool. And I remember when we got it done and it went online and we were all excited, I called up Matt Hinken, the guy I was just talking about, meteorologist, and I said, Matt, what would you say to covering the weather from inside the new freezer? He loved it. He was all about it. He was like, oh my gosh, that would be awesome. So it was in the middle of the summer. It was hot as all get out because it's hot in the summer here in the South. And here's Matt with his Nanook of the North big fluffy coat, and they had all their cables running underneath those little movable doors, and Matt's inside with the lights and the cameras and everything shooting the weather from inside the freezer. It was crazy, but it was so much fun, and we laughed and carried on about that. You just never know. I had no idea if he was going to say yes or not, but I thought I don't have anything to lose, so I'm going to pitch this to him and just see what he says. It was fun. It was crazy. And I've seen other people do some similar things to that. And again, you just never know. You gotta give it a shot. You gotta throw it out there and see what happens. All right, the follow-up.
I think one of the
go,
things,
Susan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things to think about too is not only get in the reporter's head, but to think, it's all about readership or people, sitting watching the news or listening to the radio. And, with the more readers they have or listeners, then the more they can sell their advertising for. So it all still comes down to money. And so I try to, think about what would I be interested? Would that story cause me to pick the newspaper up if I walked by it? Would I pick the newspaper up and read that? And you run the risk a little bit of, if you're more interested in your area, of thinking it's important and maybe it's not, but it's good to remember that your target is us. It's the community. So it's got to be something they think people will read.
Mm-hmm.
And it can, and another thing I too want to mention is about photographs. There's photographers that go out and they take pictures and they do what they call a cut line under the photo, and that may be all that goes in the paper, but lots of newspapers are short on photographs. And so either taking a good photograph and sending the information about it, or, you know, setting up a photo op can get something in the paper when you might not get a full story. So just keep that in mind. I always think about, it's like the visual Sandy just said about the freezer.
Mm-hmm.
It's still about visual stuff. So don't forget about the photographs, not just the story.
Yeah, that's a great point. I believe I've had some of those as well. And honestly, if you can get a picture with that little cut line or that caption in it, that can be just as powerful and maybe more so as having a full-blown story in a newspaper. So, you know, if that's what it takes and you know that your local community paper, they're all about that, then you better be looking for those photo ops and teach yourself to find them. I want to talk a little bit about follow-up. So once you send a press release, you're probably you may or may not get a phone call or an email back that has somebody asking questions. More often than not, you may need to follow up because the email is going to get lost. They're busy. It hit at a time when they were out of the office, you know, whatever. So there are a lot of ways you can follow up, and some of this depends on your comfort level, and some of it depends on how the reporter would prefer to be contacted. But email, call them, tweet them. A friend of mine is she's the 6 o'clock news anchor on the local WVLT station, the CBS affiliate, and she is always like, "Why didn't you call me about that? Why didn't you text me? That's a great story." And I know that she's always looking for something, and you know, however we can get in touch with her, either email her, text her, call her. Like I literally could tweet something at her with a link and she would go check it out. So when you start to develop relationships with the reporters, or even if you don't, but you know where they are on Twitter, you can tweet at somebody and sometimes get their attention and give them a link to a press release or a story or something on your website, and you can follow up that way or get their attention that way, or on Facebook and just tag them. So there are a lot of ways to get in front of them. And they're always looking for things that are very, very fresh. I think about for Amanda, my friend at the CBS TV station, and she wants to know immediately if there's something crazy going on. Like you guys know, I was on the board at Horsehaven, and there was one afternoon, it was right before a board meeting, that there were two horses that were running at large on the side of the parkway. And so the staff went over with a trailer and they were able to catch them, get them on the trailer, figure out who they were. And so less than 2 hours later, we're with her at a board meeting, and she said, "Why didn't you call me? I could have covered that." And that would have been a feel good of, oh my gosh, these horses are in danger. And now look, this organization is out. They're doing their job. They're doing what they're supposed to. And we have a happy ending for the story. Um, so again, it was about, for me, that was another good lesson of, okay, pay attention. This is the kind of story that she's looking for. Remember to reach out to her immediately if any of this kind of stuff happens. Reporters they're not going to pick up everything that you send them, and that's okay. But keep sending, keep offering them stories, keep refining your process, and eventually you'll start getting stories placed, and it's a pretty cool thing. I talked about this earlier. If they run the story, thank them. Send them, if the best you can do is send them a quick text or an email just to say thank you, I appreciate that, do that. A handwritten note card will get you bonus points. A handwritten card with a cookie from your local bakery, even better. Just a little something to let them know you appreciate it. And if the story was, let's say, well, I'm going to use Susan's example from earlier. So if we have a shelter that has too many animals, they're going to have to put some down, and the TV station does a story on that. When you send that thank you, you need to follow up and let them know what happened. Let them know if you got a flood of adopters coming in because they saw it on TV. They like to know that kind of thing, and it's entirely possible that you may get a follow-up story, sort of a Paul Harvey, here's the rest of the story. That can happen too. So give them a bit of an update, give them the follow-up, let them know what happened, and that helps build the relationship, and it also kind of closes the loop on that particular story. Anything you'd add to that, Susan?
That reminded me of a story once that a vocational school, they had a diesel mechanic program, and they didn't have hardly any students, and they were about to close the program down. And I got a call from the principal and wanted to know if we'd be interested in doing a story. And of course, it ended up being a really good story because what they told me was about the demand. There was a huge demand for diesel mechanics, and people didn't know it. They made good money. It was a great program to get into. And so I went on and did a story, and lo and behold, I actually later on bought a car. It was an Oldsmobile with a diesel engine in it. And whenever it broke down, I called him, and they took it in and fixed it in the vocational center. Later on, I went back and did a follow-up story about all the students that they had gotten in because of us making people aware of that program. And, and I'm not saying people, you pay a reporter off, really. It was a good story, and it's a good follow-up, but I always thought that was funny that, he helped me out. And I mean, I had to pay for the parts, but the students were, they worked for free anyway, but usually they only worked on trucks, and he would help me fix my car. And, but that, it was one of those stories. It wasn't just about him getting students. What made me interested in the story was because of the demand, job demand.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the angle. So finding that angle.
Yeah, it is. It's about looking for the spin or the twist. And again, the more you practice that, the better you get at it. All right, let's see. Other ideas. A lot of the media outlets have other ways that they can help you. So you may be really thinking about pitching a story, and that's what this has been about. But a lot of them, this is a screenshot from the Knoxville News Sentinel, they have an event page where you can submit your event and they'll list it out. The local CBS affiliate has a community calendar page. I think the local ABC affiliate does too. So a lot of them have these pages on their website with local events, local activities, things like that, where you can submit it. It'll take you 5 or 10 minutes to do it, and then it's on there. Will people see it? Don't know, but it's not going to hurt anything. And it also shows that news outlet that you're utilizing the resources that they have provided to the community, and that is a good thing. You can, if you are going to pitch a story about maybe you're having some kind of fall festival or fall activity at your facility, you can go list that on the events page, and then when you actually get a chance to talk to somebody, you can say, oh yeah, we've already listed it there, so you can get some details there if you want to run a story. Again, just shows them that you're paying attention, that you're willing and interested in using what resources that they have provided. All right.
There's something else I wanted to add.
Go ahead.
About timing. I know when I used to work for a PR firm too, and we knew from our relationships with the media what a good time of day it was to have an event or an announcement, a press conference.
Yeah.
And I can't remember exact times, but 10 a.m. in the morning or 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and never to do that during their deadline time because they're not going to show up. So, and it varies, if it's a newspaper or TV or whatever, but to get to know the timing for things and when it's best to have something that you can get reporters to come out to, need to know that.
That is a great point. Reminds me of when HGTV was fairly new to Knoxville. It's fairly new on TV, and they have their headquarters in Knoxville. And we had started a program called Plant a Row, where basically you encourage backyard gardeners to add an extra row and then donate the produce to the local food bank, which is kind of cool. It's a cool story. And so we did this huge press conference. And part of our intention was to get some PR for HGTV. That was kind of a big deal, but also just raise awareness about the program. So we planned this whole thing out. And like Susan said, we knew, I think it was at 10 o'clock in the morning. So everything's all set up and ready. And that was good. That was the right way to go about it, to plan that all out. And then there was a major fire that morning, and nobody showed up to cover our event because of this big fire that was going on somewhere in town. So sometimes, even when you plan it all out, your plans can be thwarted. Now, we still got we still got a little bit out of it, but it was not nearly what it could have been. But you can't do anything about that. If there's other breaking news, there's not a thing you can do that, and your story may get bumped. If your story is very time sensitive, then there's not a whole lot you can do about that. If it's more evergreen, like that story had a little bit of an evergreen uh, feel about it because it didn't have to necessarily be announced that day. Could be announced the next day or the next week, but as long as it was still within planting season, it was going to work. Catherine has a good question. A TV reporter is coming out to do a story at our kennel tomorrow. Yay! What's the best way to make sure they feature our website for donations? I won't be there. Any tips I should give our president who will be interviewed? Yes. So number one, have a copy of a press release, a printed copy to hand to that reporter. That's always a good idea. Even if you've already sent them a press release, have a printed copy, give them that. If you have a fact sheet about your organization where you just kind of list out the who, what, when, where, what we do, why we do it, who we serve, all that, give them that. Beyond that, gosh, we could do a whole session on being prepared to do TV interviews. Because here's what you have to know about TV interviews. They may send a photojournalist out and they may interview you for 5 minutes asking you a whole bunch of different questions, and then they may cut a 15-second clip, and that's what they use. And you have no idea which 15-second clip they're going to cut and use. So it's a really good idea to be really clear about the point that you want to get across before the reporter shows up. So that's a tip, is to go ahead and think about what's the important message that you want to get out. And then you want to encourage your president to mention that important point in every answer that they give to a question. And even things like this. So if they say, if I was doing a TV interview and they say, so, tell us about Second Harvest, I wouldn't just say, well, we do blah, blah, blah. I would say, at Second Harvest Food Bank, we provide blah, 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 blah services. So you always want to include the name of the organization because they may cut that piece out, and you want to make sure that that gets in there. You want to make sure that your key messages get in there. So if our key message, if your key message about the stories at the kennel, let's say, is, I'm going to make up something here, Catherine. Let's say that it's all about spay-neuter. Like, spay-neuter is the most important thing that we can do in our community to care for our animals. Then he needs to say that in every answer he gives to every question. And that needs to be somewhere on the fact sheet and in the press release. Like, when you hammer that message over and over, you'll be more likely for that to show up in the TV spot that they do. Monique is asking about press kits. Is it worth the effort to put these together? You can. So basically, there's just 3 or 4 pieces that you can put in a press kit. It could be your press release, a copy of your fact sheet, maybe your latest newsletter, maybe your last annual report. You can just put together several things, including a high resolution version of your logo and maybe a photo or 2 or a slip of video that you've had done that you can include for them. And the nice thing is, if you have a place on your website where you just say, like, download the press kit here, that's so easy to just send them to your website to grab all that. But regardless, if you have to do it in like paper copies, you can do that. Like, here's a copy of the press release and our fact sheet and our last annual report and blah, blah, blah. Or you can email it to them, or if there's some place they can download it, that all works too. The point is, you want to make it super easy for them to get the information they need so that they can run the story you want them to run. That's really the point of all of it. The easier you make it for them, the more likely you're going to get what you're looking for. All right, so what have you learned today? You guys picking up some tips today? We've covered a lot of ground. I will tell you this, if you have an opportunity to put a press release together and you want one of us to look at it, just throw it in the Facebook group and tag me or Susan, and one of us can come and have a look at it for you and give you some feedback. It took me a little while to really kind of get the hang of writing a press release, but once I did, it was pretty easy. Like I could probably write one now in like 10, 15 minutes if I had all the details of the story. It was a skill. That's all it was. It was just something I had to learn to do, and you can do it too. You can learn to do it too. All right, if you want to share an aha, you are welcome to throw that into the Q&A box. I'm going to challenge you to think about one thing that you can do in the coming week to start either developing a relationship, pulling together a media list, or actually pitching a story to your local news. What's something you can do to get started? And let me tell you what's coming up next. Next up, and I believe it is next Thursday, which I can't believe is August already, we're going to be doing a webinar on fundraising planning called Create a Written Fundraising Plan to Fuel Your Success. So if you don't have a fundraising plan, you want to be there for that one. This is one that I've taught many, many times, and I've got some really good handouts for you. You're going to enjoy that. The week after that is the Inspired Fundraising Retreat. We still have tickets available. If you want to get yourself to Atlanta, you're welcome to do that and join us in person, or we are going to be live streaming it. So if you want to tune in from wherever you are, you can get a live stream ticket as well. All of that is at inspiredfundraisingretreat.com. And you do have a discount because you're a member of Project SmartSprout. So if you should have an email somewhere that has that code in there, but if not, you can post in the Facebook group, tag me or tag Kristen, and one of us will get you that code. All right, Monique is saying she recently pitched a story about classes, duo Paris and Knoxville, created a press kit that's on our website, got a couple of bites through outreach to specific journalists. Awesome. That's the way you do it. You got to figure out who's covering that beat, who may be interested in that story. Reach out to them specifically, and off you go. That's awesome. Well done, Monique. All right, you guys, that is everything we have for you for today. If you've got specific questions, you can always drop in the Facebook group. And otherwise, we'll see you back here next Thursday for putting your written fundraising plan together. Thanks, y'all. Bye, everybody.